Welcome to the Jeffrey van Leeuwen podcast, episode 14. This conversation is with Jean Doré, an osteopath, social entrepreneur, and recent convert to Christianity. We talk about hedonism and how Jean's journey led him to faith and purpose. And we also discuss Jean's entrepreneurial undertakings and how he shaped himself to work in service of others. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy the Jeffrey van Leeuwen podcast, please consider subscribing or following the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube. Leaving a comment or a positive review is also a great way to help out. And with that, here is Jean Doré. Perfect. Well, all right, John. First of all, very, very good to meet you. I think we have a lot of ground to cover today because you mentioned topics like, moving from secularism to faith, your osteopathic practice, and also entrepreneurship. So I hope we'll be able to delve into that today with the time that we have. With that in mind, let me go straight to the first question, which is your life seems to have brought you to an intersection of health, faith, and entrepreneurship. What do you think the purpose of your journey is?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. This is a very dense question. I hope I will be able to answer it thoroughly. So the purpose of my mission, well, actually, I am very grateful that you've asked me for this interview because this is exactly what I've been going over for the past 3 months. And this is an ongoing journey. So, of course, I have some ways to take a step back and look at the bigger picture, but maybe you will help me to understand it better at some point.
Yeah, I hope so.
I hope so too. So, well, first of all, I would like to say that there are some preconceived ideas on French people, and I'm sorry, but I might have been very close to that at some point in my previous life. I'm 25 at the moment, and my journey started maybe 4 years ago as I was secular. I was an atheist. I was an hedonist. So that's two of the preconceived ideas on French people. Another one would be like arrogance or pridefulness. And sadly, that was me. I hope not too much anymore, but that's not for me to judge. Why I want to say this is that this is a big part of what turned me into the person I am today, because I struggled with all of these issues throughout my conversion, because I got baptized very recently. That's why I'm saying it's an ongoing journey. It was only in March of 2024, and we're in November at the moment. So this journey started 4 years ago, and the first thing that happened was my call to adventure, I could say, would be a big breakup in my life, a big relationship breakup. So I was in a relationship for a quarter of my life at that point, and the ground shook because it took away all of what I thought my life would look like, and certainly not becoming an entrepreneur and becoming Christian as well. So the purpose of my journey would be to go from where I was at that point and becoming who I am today, which is a Christian, a professional osteopath, because I was a student at that point, an entrepreneur who really tries to, well, at the very least, try to articulate my faith with the value of my work as an osteopath, which is a health practitioner, and as best as I can do to testify about my journey.
And you said it started 4 years ago. What happened 4 years ago?
So I was at a point in my life where I was maybe too comfortable with my preconceived ideas. I thought I had it pretty much figured out. I knew that I was going to be an osteopath. I knew that I was going to do my life with that woman. I knew that, I had studied philosophy, so I thought I understood pretty much everything. But looking back, what I can say is that I was, first of all, pretty foolish and naive. And also my lifestyle wasn't really good. I was an hedonist. And so what that meant was that I was pretty much addicted to several things. One of the things would be tasty foods, which is very common. Another one would be pornography, which is pretty common, especially in young men, especially maybe in France. I don't know for the other parts of the world, but I was also really obsessed with this relationship. And even though it was like 5 years, 4 breakups, and a very fused relationship and a long distance relationship, I was really, really, I thought it was going to last forever. And so the breakup was really a big step forward into making me understand that I didn't really get what I was walking, what road I was walking.
Right. So you were 21 years old. You were in this relationship with this woman for 6 to 7 years, because you mentioned a quarter of your life.
Yeah, more like 5 years, but
5 years.
That's about it. Yeah.
Right. 5 years based on a 21-year life. Gotcha. Okay. And you were just you pretty much didn't have, between quotation marks, any worries. You were enjoying the food. You were enjoying the things that you were engaged in, and there was nothing. There was not really a driver towards something. You were just enjoying the time, and then that breakup happens, and then that triggered you to take some steps. Do I have that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I think, I don't know who said that, but someone said that the most miserable people on this earth are lazy and lazy people who have ambition, right? And I think that was me. Like, I wanted a big life for myself because I was really passionate, but I didn't have the discipline, I didn't have the lifestyle, I didn't have the mindset, and I didn't have the mission. I didn't have quite the drive, as you said.
Okay, so then that breakup happened.
Right.
Talk me through it. What happened?
Well, it was right about the time when I started to take care of real patients, because throughout my 5 years of study of osteopathy, I took care of my fellow students and they took care of me. And at that point, in my 4th year, I started working in the clinic of the school. And my friend would look at me going to the clinic, telling me basically that I looked like shit. Because, I was just broken down. And so...
Because of the breakup.
Yeah. And I would like to say that I found Jesus at that point, and I was like, yay, that's my new best friend, and everything worked well. But no, I was an atheist, and I started praying, which can tell you how much into the underworld I had gone. But I wasn't really ready to take the rightful steps forward. Like, at that point, I was still a hedonist, and I actually followed an advice from this ex-girlfriend, which was to go into a sort of seducer type of group, which was a sort of masculinist group, which was a pretty weird time of my life, but I must say a very interesting one. And so at that point, rather than to go into depth and take time to heal myself, I rather went into this sort of accumulation of pleasures. And I really think that it took me not too much time, but intense situations to understand that this was not the path I was supposed to take.
Okay. Just to get the timeline straight. So after the breakup, you said you were already engaged in helping your fellow students. So I assume that you're talking about your osteopathic practice then. You already started that back then, when you were 21 years old.
Not exactly. This was still when I was studying, and my entrepreneur journey starts when I graduated, and that was when I was 22 and then 23, and this
So
was
a year
still
later.
Yeah, this was in 1 year later, and So at that point, no, I was still studying, and that's when I met a friend of mine, a close friend who, well, she's very special. She's very special. She's an osteopath. She's at the moment working in a clinic in Canada. But at that point, she was doing her 10th year of study in osteopathy, which is a study that takes 5 years. So you can imagine it was a pretty special, special type of situation. She was already 10 years older than me and had done a master in philosophy. She had traveled a lot. She was a musician. She was someone I admired a lot. And what was really interesting in that situation was that, and I think people who then become, well, successful or interesting, they don't always talk about this one person that really guided you. And what really happened was that she was very, very welcoming and non-judgmental. And so she cheered me up along the way, even though I was doing foolish things at that point. And anyway, she helped me get into my senses, especially on one subject, which was that I was really foolish and didn't understand anything about this world. So the way she did it was that she lent me a book, which is called the Bhagavad Gita. And I'm not sure you're familiar with this. Maybe you are.
No, I'm not.
It's one of the most important texts in Hindu religion. And to say this was life-changing is to say a little bit, but one interesting thing to say about this book was that it was a children version. And even the children version was life-changing. So that's just to say the least. The first thing I understood while reading this book was that I didn't know anything, because this book was written, well, allegedly 5,000 years ago, but maybe between, let's say, 2 and 5,000 years ago, okay? And anything in that book revealed so much knowledge about the human experience, the human life, the human psyche, the human body even, and morals and wisdom. I was just like, hey, I don't know anything. And these people, like so many thousand years ago, just wrote that down, and it's still accurate today. So that was one of the big steps that happened that really made me understand that I should be more humble when it came to claiming I had understood anything at 21 or 22.
Why did she bother to help you? You think what drove her? What drove the contact between you two?
Yeah, we were in a very interesting situation. So she had come to our school to complete the 2 last years of her studies, and well, so she was new, and we had a group. We were in this little room where there was only 8 places for us, and we were this very tight group of students. And I was kind of in the middle of the room and like minding my own business, like laughing at YouTube videos while other people were like working and things. And she joined us in that group, and she put a desk right in front of me. And this became like a vortex, like basically chaos in the middle of order. Like our tables were so messy at some point. People were just coming into this room and putting things on the table. And my friend said something along the lines of, "Hey, people are taking our trash can for a table." And so what we would do would be like to really create that vortex, like to annoy the maximum of pupils in that little room. That it was all our friends. But what we did was that every single day we pushed our 2 desks just a little bit more in a circle, and like in 2 months we had swapped places.
Right. Okay.
So I think we just became close friends, because at that point we were really having fun together. And she lived at my parents, like in a location, not a location. I don't know how you say this in English. My parents rented a flat to her, basically.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And she was with her son, and her son was that great kid, very intelligent, very fun. I had great relationship with her kid. He would come to the class and hide under the desks when our teachers would enter the room because he was not supposed to be there. So it was a pretty fun time, during the studies. And so we became close, and we would share our stories. And it was always very interesting because she was very non-judgmental about this whole thing. Like, she basically just wanted to see her friend be well again.
Right. Okay. Right. So she was basically for you well, aside from being a good friend, she was also a sparring partner for you in the sense of helping you think about specific things, or just giving you some outlook or on what it can also be like.
Yeah, exactly. And so since she had that, I mean, that breadth of experience, living 10 years in India, and having a very intense practice of theater, holy theater and dance in India, and having a master's degree in philosophy in France, and being an osteopath and being a mom and all of that. Well, she could really help me like get into other positions and other point of views. And when I finished reading the Bhagavad Gita, I was ready to ask one question, which is maybe the best questions I've ever asked myself, and that I'm still asking myself today, which is, what is that specific book that no one talks about in my whole group of friends, society, family, that is so important, that it's like the ground and the most important part of our whole culture, but that everyone ignores, and everyone says it's all just an old, dusty, like very uninteresting book.
Piece of
And
literature.
this is the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
So she lent me her version of the New Testament. And what I did was I had a journal this year. That's a very interesting journal because it starts in January saying, this is my year of transition from being a student to a professional. This is my year of transition from being a kid to an adult. And like 4 months into the year, it's like, I didn't think this would go through a breakup, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this was really the big year of transition for me because, of course, that's when I learned about Christianity. And so in my little journal, what I wrote was, I thought, okay, I'm going to open up the New Testament, and I'm going to write any sentence that just feels interesting. I might have like copied the whole book. My journal was over in like 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
There was just so much interesting stuff. And what was really interesting, and that's why I got interested in Jordan Peterson as well after that, was that it was really like concrete, very down to earth, like interesting advice for everyday life. Like, if you just took in the pretense that, well, you're going to learn something if you try to implement these, well, it was an adventure to go through. And so I was not maybe as ready to start changing my life as I would become like 1 year or 2 years after that, but it was already like a big step forward.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, I would like to summarize so far again, just to make sure that I got your story straight, because I do have a couple of questions for you. So you're 25 years old right now.
Right.
Your story starts when you're 21 years old, so
Right.
4 years ago. And that's
Yeah.
the moment that you were dealing with a breakup of a relationship that lasted for around 5 years.
Right.
Then on your campus or on your school, you met this lady who was 10 years older than you. And you mentioned that you started, engaging in a friendship with her. She became a sparring partner for you, and she was a person that showed you a different way of life. Kind of sounds a bit dramatic, but I think it boils down to that.
Right.
What I'm really curious about specifically, because you mentioned in the beginning that you were living the life when you were 21 years old of a hedonist.
Mhm.
And hedonism, in my mind, is classified by somebody who lives by the day, takes the pleasures for now, regardless of what happens in the future. That can mean a whole lot of things. It might mean, spending all your money today and not saving for the future. It might mean, eating a lot of food today, not worrying about your health in the future, stuff like that. What I'm really curious about is your transition, because you mentioned that meeting her made you maybe not in one day. It didn't change you in one day, but you took very specific steps to move away from the lifestyle of hedonism. What I'm really curious about is, well, first of all, how did you come to the conclusion that your current lifestyle was not good to begin with? And second of all, how did you identify very specific steps to move away from that lifestyle and more into a purpose-driven lifestyle? What are the things that drove that? Maybe you already answered it. Maybe you are already alert to it. But I'm very curious what you think about that.
Well, that's two very good questions, and I agree with your vision of hedonism, and that's pretty much what I was doing at that point, even though I was criticizing it all the time
Mm-hmm.
in others, but that's what I was doing. And so at that point, I was still into the seducing type of relationship, and I had one experience, then a second, and I figured out like, hey, that's just not me. Like, if I can really give myself into a relationship for 5 years when I'm only like 15 to 21, it means that this is a pretty important thing. And my whole dream during my whole life, like for 10 years, I've always dreamt of being a father, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I saw and I felt that cognitive dissonance between what I was doing and like how it made me feel and well my long-term goal. And at some point I had a new experience which would really maybe change a lot of things, which was I met a new girlfriend, which is my girlfriend at the moment, a person I truly love and I hope I will do my life with. And
Mm-hmm.
well, what's really interesting about our relationship is that she comes from a feminist background, and I was at that point into a sort of masculinist group, and we were these two extremes, and we came from a sort of pagan lifestyles, atheists, and we were doing a lot of sort of spiritual, superficial stuff at that point. But when we met, we were so different. Well, we just had to talk. We couldn't like have the pretense that the other person knew what we were talking about. So it
Mm-hmm.
started as this truth-seeking relationship to understand the other person, to try to get what's going on in their life, why they view the world like they do, and I mean that was a very brave thing to do. But at that point, it wasn't clear to me at that point that I was quite ready to take the steps that you were talking about. And
Mm-hmm.
so steps, they came a little later because I realized, especially in this group, in this class, in this room of 8 to 9 people I was talking to you about, in which I was doing the vortex thing with my
Mm-hmm.
friend,
Yep.
um, we were all talking about being virtuous. And I was reading the New Testament at that point, and I was like, hey, we're not virtuous like at all. Like it's a terrible thing to behold when you think you're virtuous, when you think you have the moral high ground, and you just look at your actions and you think, hey, I don't think I really have the good reasons to say that. And so what happened at that point was that I was experiencing a lot with fasting just for health reasons. And I thought like, hey, what the hell? Let's try Lent. And so I got into that idea that I would go to this mass on the beginning of Lent, which is Ash Wednesday.
And Lent is a celebration day.
Lent is a 40-year fasting period for the Christians,
Okay.
and it's a preparation for Easter. So
Okay.
it's the whole point is to say Jesus is dead, and then at Easter say, hey, Jesus is not dead anymore, and we get a big party. Okay. And so it's interesting because of course fasting is a big part of it, and of course fasting can create some very interesting experiences, spiritual experiences, but not only spiritual, like literal experiences of feeling like, hey, I don't have the whole control on my life. I'm used to maybe having plenty, and now I have not as much. I'm fearing that I won't eat enough. When I eat, I feel like I have to take it all in at exactly right now because I'm fearing for my own life, and it's not my conscious controlling mind that's telling me this, but it's my body just acting on instinct. And so it's all of this. It's remembering that you are in this world, like life is a gift, and you have to take it as something very important, right? So I thought, well, I'm going to try Lent. Okay, I'm not Christian yet. I'm not like, I didn't believe in anything at that point, but I was just thinking like, hey, I like fasting. It's fun. I did a 6-day fasting, no eating for 6 days with a friend, just for fun. So I was like, hey, just let's try this for 40 days. And of course, it's not just like not eating at all for 40 days. But anyway, so I went to this mass with
Why was it fun for you, you think? What did you enjoy about it?
I don't know, looking at my very muscular friend lose 7 kilos, sorry, in 6 days. That was really, really fun. And like regaining it all in like 24 hours. That was
Oh,
really
wow.
fun.
Okay, so
Biking to school while on an empty stomach for 5 days. That was really fun. Not being able to lift open a door, even though that's the basic door that you cross 5 times every day to go to your clinic. Doing your last consultation of the 6-day fast, your eyes closed because the person in front of you is blind and they won't notice.
right.
That's what was fun.
Okay, so it was just different than normal, let's say, and that's just why it was fun to explore.
Yeah, and so at that point we were giving all of these advices to these patients, and it feels really weird when you're saying to someone like, "Hey, you should fast." Okay, have you tested that? No. Well, what do you know about it? Like that was the point. It was to understand how it felt like, and well, I could go into it a little bit more, but that might not serve the whole story.
Well, you said a couple of very interesting things, specifically about that hedonism part again. Because my question was, how did you move away from that? How did you draw the conclusion that moving away from that was the right one? Especially because that conclusion, I don't think, is very self-explanatory if you are in that lifestyle. Because why, why, if you are enjoying the moments of the day, why should that be different all of a sudden? Why should you take on the suffering of not doing something now and saving it for in the future, or something like that? And you mentioned a couple of interesting things. So you said you dreamt of being a father, which, well, that to me right now, that seems like the complete opposite. Because that means, you are giving up everything right now in order to build a future way down the line, something beautiful way down the line. So that's an interesting one. And that sounds to me like a driver that maybe not actively, but that contributed it to move you away from that lifestyle. And the same thing can be said about truth seeking that you did. You didn't explicitly say that you made a conclusion that all of a sudden you came to the conclusion that truth seeking and reading those stories that you read in the Bible, that those drove you specifically away from hedonism towards the more purpose driven lifestyle. But they still sound like drivers. But it still feels, and maybe I got this wrong, so correct me if what I'm saying is incorrect. But it still feels like I'm not grasping what specifically drove you to the conclusion that you needed to move away from hedonism? Did you realize it was destructive and that it wasn't how would you say that? You couldn't keep on doing that? And if yes, how did you get there? I hope I'm asking the question clearly.
Yeah. I think part of the reason why it's not clear is that I didn't quite make it as articulate as I could in my analysis. But I think one of the very interesting things that happened very soon during Lent, on the half of Lent, so 20 days in, would be that I learned how to say no. And when you're an hedonist, you think you're very free because you're free to do as you please all the time, but you're not very free to say no, even to yourself.
Right.
And so when you're experiencing with fasting, well, you have to say no a lot of times, every single day, all day. That's really, really complex. And of course, saying no sounds like something pretty obvious. But when you're used to saying yes all the time, when you're addicted, for instance, especially addicted to some things that are very, very salient, like food, or very compulsive, like pornography, well, you don't get to say no. You say yes because you have to say yes, and
Right.
you might feel guilty or disgusted or uncomfortable about your impulse afterwards, but that doesn't really impact you when the impulse comes back again. So the big drive to say no to compulsion is not really how you feel after you've gone through that impulse. I think to me it was more about understanding that lifestyle changes, and to probe your lifestyle changes like very softly, like an inch at a time, was really the life savior. But I haven't gotten to that part of the story yet, and my story might be just too long, and that's why I haven't given you details you desire at that point. But so the idea is that I learned at very great lengths of experiencing, because that's what I'm like. I just like to experience all that sort of things. That's why I enjoyed fasting as well. It was that you can really engage in something if you have the discipline to, but getting that discipline is not easy. There's a saying that I love in Atomic Habits. I don't know if it's from the writer of Atomic Habits or someone else, but that's a great book that I would recommend to anyone that's trying to solve their lifestyle issues. And that saying is, the people with the most will or willpower use it the less. So if you have a lot of willpower, you will do everything to make your journey into getting to be a better person, about not doing efforts, but just doing things that feel right and that are easy to do at the moment you want to do them. Okay. And so that's what I discovered about fasting, is that if I want to fast, like let's say I need to not eat something for lunch, like I shouldn't eat meat at some point or something like that, or I shouldn't eat candy or sweets. Well, of course, if they're there in the house, it's harder. But another thing that can be done, and that's what really got me into this deeper exploration of myself, would be to ask myself, like, do you need this? Why do you want this? And most of the time, as I was telling you, fasting is amazing for that, because you start differentiating between wanting something, needing something, being hungry, just wanting to eat because your mouth feels lonely, or eating out of emotions. And most of the time out of fear, because you think you're going to miss something, or even like feeling the fact that when you're eating less carbohydrates, well, you get less compulsion to eat all the time because your blood levels are just more stable. And this shows you how little you have control over these very things you think as an hedonist you have all the control over in the world, because you're just like living your life, being free, choosing whatever you want. And you just realize that you're most of the time just acting on impulse.
Hmm.
So that was the deeper stuff that I was talking about fasting. That was really fantastic, and I would recommend anyone to try fasting at least for a day and see how hard it is. Just a day, you'd think like, yeah, it's just skipping 3 meals. That's okay. No, it's not. It's changing all of your previously very stable habits, and you don't like that at all. Like, really, you don't like that. And even more if someone starts telling you like, hey, do you want to eat this, and you have to say no. Like uh, the social aspects of eating and of food is so deep. Like, sharing a meal is so important to humans. So this was really important, and it goes to the same idea of sharing what you do with the people you are with. So I was with this group at that point, and I was sharing the same values, and I was sharing the same habits, and I was sharing the same bad um, behaviors that I was understanding were wrong, but doing it nonetheless and feeling very virtuous about. So I what I did was I decided at some point I'm going to leave that group. And that was a very weird and brave thing to do, because at that point I was just walking out of my tribe essentially, and I decided to join another tribe, which was Catholics.
What brought you to that decision to leave the original one?
I was just feeling like shit. I was feeling like I was thinking something in my head and acting the other direction exactly. Like,
Hmm.
it was a terrible feeling. This cognitive dissonance where you're thinking like, hey, I'm a moral person, and then you just start hearing people around you tell something bad in the back of someone else, and you just chime in and you start spitting your venom, and you're thinking like, hey, I shouldn't do that, and then someone gives you the someone gives you an easy possibility of talking in the back of someone, and you just go right at it, like, without thinking. It's so easy. It's
Hmm.
like people will tell you like, yeah, it's easier to be religious. Yeah, try it. Try to act on your morals. That's so hard. Like, acting on impulse, being addicted is very, very easy comparatively, but it doesn't make you feel as complete, I would say.
Right. So you had the feeling that within that original group, and you also mentioned this when you were reading the stories, that you realized like, hey, what we are doing right now, what we are discussing right now, is not virtuous in the least. That lasted for a little bit, and it made you realize, okay, I'm not part of this group, and I shouldn't be here, because what is being thrown around is not who I am, and it's not what I believe in.
Yeah. What I should say is that I didn't leave because they were doing that. I left because I was doing that in their presence. And every single of these people, they were my friends. I joined this in my 5th year. I was in clinic. I was taking care of patients, but I really went into that year thinking, hey, I'm going to go in this room and make jokes. Like,
Hmm.
that was my purpose at that point. So it was not a decision to leave them because they were not good friends or not good persons in any way or shape. It was just like um, the group culture and
Dynamics. Yeah.
the group dynamics were just not what I wanted to do. And I figured out, like, at that point, if I want to be free, I should preferably be with a group of people that make it easier for me to act in a way that's free, and not
Free
just like, yeah,
free from what?
free from compulsion, free from acting on impulses that are stupid.
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole thing. And coercion, like, not saying the things that you shouldn't say because they're not the right things to say.
Mm-hmm.
Like, at that point, the whole culture that I was part of was a very secular culture, and saying that, well, Christianity was interesting was, well, it was acceptable, but it wasn't usual. So I joined that group, and what I was telling you about this very interesting thing with my girlfriend is that, well, she joined with me. And she might have been the president of that group, even though she wasn't baptized, wasn't asking to get baptized, wasn't really Christian. And they just let us come as we were, took us in easily, asking questions respectfully.
Mm-hmm.
And this group was really interesting because they were like, they were students from good French families from Versailles, which is a very, very rich town. They were students from abroad, like from Africa most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
There were these, there were extremists from the left, extremists from the right. There were these people that were newcomers to the faith, these people that were here for like 24 years. And everyone in this group was crazy. And I say this in a good fashion. Everyone
They
was
were
crazy.
interesting.
Everyone was really interesting.
Gotcha.
Everyone had their thing, and everyone was different. Like every single one of them was different from the group. They all had their thing, and they all had that thing that made them stand out. And they were healthy, and that made me really suspicious, because I was coming out of a school that studied health and that was promoting health for patients, and every one of my student friends were much more unhealthy than my newfound friends that had never ever studied health. And I was like, how could that happen? And when I say healthy, I don't mean like in shape or physically looking healthy. I'm saying like doing things that are purposeful and just right, like easily. You see what I mean?
It had meaning what they did.
Yeah, and it was not easy for them. I'm not saying they were just like perfect, regular, like easy people. They were struggling, but they had this sort of grit to them, and that was something, because most of them were younger than me, and I admired them.
Yeah, that can definitely be quite the experience, and I can relate to that in some way. If you meet people can be really inspiring in very weird ways, just because they show a certain tenacity, a certain character, a certain way of dealing with issues or with thoughts or with each other or whatever. Um, it looks to be very meaningful in that case then.
Exactly. And so at that point, I was kind of into the Christian deal. And so I thought, well, I should maybe not act on impulse this time, but act on instinct and start to join this group. So I asked to be baptized, but something you have to know about Christian conversion, at least in my experience in France and with Catholics, they're not like, hey, you're here on Sunday, you want to get baptized, come next week and we'll do that. It's like, wait 2 years until you're sure that you want to do that. Wait 2 years. And if you're still sure, okay, you can do that.
Right.
So in some ways, it can feel like, hey, you're not really making it easy for people to come in. But at the same time, it's like, you can't say that we are forced to do that. It's not like, it's really, there's a lot of questions about, do you really want that? Why do you want that? How do you want that? What are you going to do with that? Like, it's not just like you get your card and you're part of the group, and and you get 20% off at the next dinner. Like, that's not it. Not at all.
Right.
And so at that point, I really went into the idea that I should act on my faith and stop from just being that former self that I had developed over all these years. But of course, it took me, well, 1 year and a half, and maybe 2 years to really get to like being baptized and being the new me that I am right now. So it's still a long journey.
And why did you want to get baptized?
um, well, I'm going to jump a little bit ahead. Maybe, so that was 1 year ago in the summer of 2023. I discovered that in all of my experiencing, in all of my hedonism type relationships and activities, well, I had gotten hurt pretty bad. Like, in my situation in the French school where I went when I was younger, being gay was not an issue at all. And so at some point I thought, hey, I might try that. I mean, I'm 13 years old. Everything's okay. No one's going to mind in my family. And so I hooked up with the guy at that point, and things went pretty fast. And he was the same old as I was. And I don't think that's the right way to start with your sexuality, I think. Not, I mean, I wouldn't recommend to anyone to go as fast as I did at that point. So that was hurtful to discover that and to like wonder on that and think, hey, that wasn't good. That wasn't like I was not ready. I was not okay with what happened. Also, well, being exposed to a lot of graphic images on the internet can be pretty helpful. And I realized, well, I mean, I started to realize, but it took me a long time to really get through it. Well, I had PTSD from exposure to different images. And, well, learning anatomy, you're supposed to have these images of the human body in your mind all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was learning on text because I couldn't anymore. I couldn't have images in my mind because my psyche had like literally underwent a panic situation where it said, hey, don't do that anymore. And you know what? The amazing thing about this journey is that now I can talk about it in this half jokingly tone because I got cured. I got cured of all of this. I really did. And now I can go back to studying my favorite subject, which is humans. And I can have pictures in my head, and that's just amazing.
Yeah, that sounds really good. Sounds like a very good change.
Yeah, it's a good deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, good for you for that.
Thank you.
How did if we make a history jump? So before your story starts,
Right.
so before you were 21 years old, and before you met that girlfriend that you then broke up with, which is 5 years before that, so you were 16 back then. Where does this whole lifestyle of hedonism and living in the moment and not caring about tomorrow, where does it come from, you think? Where did it start?
Probably two things. The first is basic culture around me, like everyone's doing it. So lest I don't have as much fun as others, I will do it.
And everybody is like parents, brothers, sisters, friends.
Yeah, family, friends, culture. Basically, in I can't say college because in English that's not the right word, but college in French is like 11 to 14 years old. You're basically tested out as on how much sins you commit. And I don't mean sins as in a moralistic viewpoint. I just mean literally, like how much you don't behave is how much you are respected. For instance, when I graduated from high school, I was fortunate enough to get the best mention you can have on your baccalaureate. I was pretty happy about that. And there was a whole ceremony of graduating. And so the director called and said, hey, so this guy, he had that mention. Okay. So I took my diploma and I went away. And there was that guy who had not worked a day in his whole school, had like 9,13 points, and the teachers like prodded it a bit and gave him like 10. And he got his diploma and everyone applauded him because it was a close call. And I mean, good for him. That's great. But you see, that's the kind of culture that was pushed at that point. And I don't think it's a very gratifying culture. And I mean, in a certain way, well, it's pretty good that I wasn't even more egotistical and even more praised for my success at that point, but because I was not humble enough at all. But I don't think what was going on at that point was a really good idea. Um, and so it was also to act on status and be respected that I could do these things, but usually out of pleasure as well, like usually just out of pleasure as well.
So pretty much what you said is you were growing up in an environment as a young child where the people around you, both friends and family, were not really purpose driven, and were living more in the pleasures of the day, which is automatically something that rubbed on you. You took that over pretty much, and this
Well,
was in your early life.
now I can't say they were not purpose driven because my parents are artists, which
Mhm.
is, and my whole family basically are artists, and I hope I can say that of me as well. But like, there's art in entrepreneuriat, which is the French word. So that's how I get through to art at the moment. But
Mhm.
so basically, purpose is very, very important. But like instinct and impulse and, well, of course, hard work, but also like living in the moment and in the present is very important as well. Like you can't sacrifice your way of doing art by just working all the time. Like you can get into a certain area where you can do both, and that's what my parents did, and they had an art company
Mhm.
for a while, and it's very impressive what they've done with it. But I mean, yeah, it's I admire the work that they have done, but it didn't give me at that point in my life. I mean, I had my own personality to account for that as well, of course, but I wasn't really aware on how to do that, how to plan steps to become more disciplined. And maybe I can get into how I became more disciplined, if you will.
Yeah, but did you have a mentor back then? Did you have somebody that you could look up to? Somebody who could guide you into the idea of, hey, this is what a proper man is, for example, or this is what you should be as a human, or something along those lines. Did you have somebody that inspired you back then?
So back then, so you mean before even the relationship?
Yeah, so in your teens and
Yeah.
in your early teens. Yeah.
There would be one teacher. He is Mr. Stevens, and he was that amazing 70 plus years guy that was just like completely enamored with teaching, so much so that he got fired because he was too old to teach. And he would
Wow.
just come back, he would just be there like, hey, I'm not doing this to get paid, you guys. I don't care. So
Check.
yeah, he was an amazing guy. He is the reason why I developed my English the way I did. He got me in love with English. He got me in love with critical thinking and basically literature. And like, this man would come. This is an infamous story because it's a great one to share an experience about him, but at the same time, like it shows you that it wasn't exactly. It's not that he wasn't friendly, but he was pushing us. So he comes right before Christmas break, and he comes with a big bag, big shopping bag. And
Mm-hmm.
he comes into the class with this big smile. And he says, pupils, I have got
Pupils.
a, I have got a gift for you. And I chose it specifically for each one of you. And then
Okay.
he went around the room talking very specifically to each one of us. We were 15 in this room because it was a special section that was an international British section.
Mm-hmm.
And so he goes around the room talking specifically to each pupil, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he gives each of us a specific book from his own library of perfect, amazing, great books, literature geniuses, and he hands them to us. And I got one that was really, really weird. Like, increasingly weird as I read it, like something along the lines of like in Latin America, there's like a village, and then like the people disappear, and then cats replace them, and then like there's this crazy part where like a girl gets like sucks a guy's dick while he's sleeping, and that was a crazy part of the book, and then like the whole thing is like, wow, this is a crazy book, not a book I would I would have like planned on reading myself, and even less so from a 70-year-old guy, you know.
Why
It
did
was
he
a
give?
crazy
Why did he
book.
give that to you? What was the idea
Well,
behind that book?
he had a nickname for me. He called me Renaissance Man because I was so interested in literature and science at the same time, and critical thinking and philosophy. And I think he wanted just to give me a thought-provoking story with like symbolism and weird stuff, and just make me think, you know. And so he gave one of these books to each of us, and he said, well, it's Christmas break. You have 2 weeks to write a 10 pages essay on that book. Have a good break. So we were both so thrilled and like completely abashed from the whole, we have to read a 300 pages book and give a 10 pages essay on this in like 2 weeks. And when the hell are we going to have fun with our families? But he was like that. And he had spent his whole life teaching and just like really, really being a great teacher. So that was a guy that really, well, in that environment, what was really great, and it really speaks to what I have become now, because, well, in France, your teacher grades you, he gives you a grade depending on how good you recite the lesson. Question A, you have learned this in course, what's the answer? And you answer A. Well, that's completely stupid. Like, that's truly stupid. You don't make intelligent people by doing this. What they did in English literature and English geography was that, well, we're going to ask you a question. You then get to articulate on it. You then get to give your self-opinion, your own opinion on that question. And then if your logic is good and if you have good argumentations, you're going to get a good grade, regardless of if the teacher thinks like you do, regardless of if that's what we studied in class, regardless of if that's, what would you say, politically correct answer. It was like, hey guys, give a thoughtful response. That was the whole thing. And that was amazing to me, because nowhere else in any classes could you do that. And then when I went to osteopathy school, we would answer on QCMs. I don't know if that's a word in English, but you know, quizzes where you have to say A, B, C, D. And that's just not thoughtful. That's not how you develop a mind. That's how you develop like a ship's brain.
Sounds like an interesting character, Mrs. Steven.
He was amazing. he got us to his home when he left, when we graduated, and that was lovely. That's their word, the British. They say lovely all the time, and bloody. So
Bloody, yeah, they do.
yeah,
They do.
that was a bloody lovely evening.
A bloody lovely evening. All right. Is there anything that he taught you that you are trying to apply in your own life right now? What specifically, for example, right now, stays with you very strongly? What's the first thing that comes to mind?
Implying myself in weird stuff and seeing what happens. I think that's something that I have done my whole life, and it speaks to the weird experiences that I've had. But I mean, that's great. That's part of my character now. But I think being thoughtful on what you experience, like not, I mean, I was not that good at that point, because I was an intellectual idiot, as I like to say. I thought I understood things, but I was very not wise. But I was young, so maybe that's why. But I think, yeah, being thoughtful, that's a really interesting one. Being critical, being able to say, hey, I think this, but maybe there's another reason, another thing to do. And that's what I do all the time. I think in my head all the time. I have like 2 or 3 people talking all the time in my head in different languages and telling me what I should think. And I don't always agree with all of them.
Well, it also goes together with that whole point that you try to make about humility. As a kid, you, generally speaking, I think you don't really have a lot of humility, and the lens through which you view the world is the lens of your experience. And in your experience, that's your primary input for how you decide if something is true or not, or how you see the world. So you don't really consider as a kid that there's other people out there that are maybe wiser than you or smarter than you or know more about a certain thing than you. And I mean, it's quite obvious that they do, right? Because you could, for example, ask yourself the question like, okay, you have an iPhone in your hand right now, and the person that has built that is probably way smarter on this specific thing than I am. So it's quite obvious that there are technologies that you don't know how that work, and there must be people that know how that work, and that's very specifically where somebody is then smarter than you are. But in general, as a way of approaching the world and as a way of viewing the world, and as a way, for example, how looking how politics work, how humans work, it's very, I think, young people, and sometimes also, well, quite often actually also people that are older, they are not really able to get outside of their own perspective, to look at the world through somebody else's eyes, and consider the idea that you may not be so wise at all as you think. That's a preposterous idea for a lot of people, I think. So realizing, being humble and realizing, okay, pretty much every single human in the world can teach me something. That is a game changer.
It is. It is. And that's something that I freed myself from when I got out of this relationship with my breakup.
Mm-hmm.
Because at that point I was so arrogant, and I was with someone that made me feel so important that I could not have understood. I mean, I could have said that virtuously, rightfully, but not act on it.
How did you teach yourself to be more humble? What specific steps did you take?
Oh my God. That's the whole answer. Well, well. So I told you about the fact that I went out of my friends group and joined a more Catholic student group.
Yep.
And then I graduated. I decided that I would get baptized. So I engaged myself in something that was, I mean, I already engaged myself into like 5 years of studies. So I knew I could engage myself, but like this time it was, I wouldn't say unnecessary, but it was less, less interested driven, I would say. And you asked why, and I told you a little bit about the fact that I felt hurt and I needed cleansing and healing. But I also, when I got when I graduated, I also was pretty ambitious, and I wanted to build an enterprise, a business, right? We are going to get to that point at some point in this interview. So I wanted to do that. And I mean, it was pretty crazy because I got some pretty good feedback at that point on my idea, but my idea was like ludicrously ambitious. It was just too big for who I was at that point. And so I started funding this thing and doing all I could to try and get it done. And I invested money, I invested time, I invested energy. I got 2 of my colleagues from the same group that I talked about earlier to join me into that business. And we started that business. We did a crowdfunding. We got some money, and we started an online network of patients and health practitioners. And that was great for a year. That was very good for a year. Like we crashed it pretty fast because we didn't have the finance, we didn't have the marketing experience with, we were, well, at some point I was just so poor because I had invested all my money. Like I had 3 jobs. I was working 7 days a week, and I couldn't keep up. And that will make you humble, I think, failing and trying your best and being poor. I mean, I always try not to say poor because I could still eat, I could still do a lot of things. I had a lot of privilege, but still I hadn't any money, and I just graduated from a 40,000 euros school that I was paying debt to. So
Right.
I was indebted. I didn't have any money. I was working. I was trying my best, but then again, just didn't work. And that was okay. I mean, that was amazing. That was a great situation to be in because, first of all, it took away some of this arrogance from me. It made me rely on the day more than just enjoy the day and try my best at while I was doing what I was doing. But I still wasn't as disciplined as I am today. I was so working 3 jobs and my business wasn't starting properly. And so what happened was that one of my business associates, her own career path as an osteopath was pretty good. So she left, and I was with my other business associates, but we had a sort of 1 month break, and I started listening to Jordan Peterson like 35 hours a month. So basically, I had a full week of listening to Jordan Peterson.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of got that I should take my life seriously at that point, but not in the articulate way that Jordan Peterson would talk about it. And I started reading that book, Atomic Habits, which was a game changer, offered to me by my business associate, which left, which might tell you something about my organization at that point. So she gifted me that book. I read it. I started implementing it, starting having some little habits that would change my life, like one step at a time. And so I took it more seriously. And so the way I became more humble was to understand that it wasn't all about being passionate about something and giving it your whole for 2 weeks. Like that's not interesting at all. Like that's what I wanted to do as an hedonist. Like say, hey, I'm interested in all this vast array of things. I'm going to give 2 weeks each and just enjoy the moment I'm interested in them and then toss them out. And at that point I said, hey, well, I've got that second idea for a business, which is a nonprofit, and it's getting some great feedback. It's getting some very interesting feedback. And I wonder if I take it seriously, if it will run and if it will do something. And this idea was that, well, basically in France, since COVID hit, 40% of all young people from 18 to 25 have some symptoms associated to anxiety. 40%. That's too much, to say the least. That's really a big number. And so in schools, they were implementing a lot of mental care situations like psychology, psychiatry, which is not a good indication, but anyway, that was available. And what I had wanted to do for a long time was to implement osteopathy as well, because we take care of the body, but of course we take care of the whole person. That's our whole thing. We think holistically. So I wanted to do that, and there was a big bank in France which literally gave us without any anything in exchange. Like they gifted us 18,000 euros, and I signed a contract which was supposed to be 15, and it was 30,000 euros. And I thought, hey, I might have something. And so I started to take it more seriously and to think, well, I'm working 3 jobs, but maybe if I do this, I can maybe just work in this nonprofit and make it work. And also I was advancing in my in my spiritual path, and both were feeding into each other like crazy. Like when I felt that I was on the right, oriented properly in my spiritual journey, the work was just being done, and there were miracles, like what I was talking to you previously. Like, this was crazy. People were just enjoying the idea of the project, and I had not that many efforts to do, as long as I was just cultivating this serving manner of working. As long as I was not trying to serve myself, but just rather serve my mission, serve my project, serve the interest of the young students in my town, people just seemed to regularly like what I did and like me, and I didn't have to do much more.
The
It
feedback
just
was
came
good.
in. Sorry?
The feedback was good.
The feedback was good, and the actual actions were good. So
Right.
this started to work, and now it's full 2.5 day a week, every week, and we're joining the second most successful business school in France, which is in my town, luckily. And we signed contracts with partners that are accompanying us, which is giving more credit to my nonprofits. And I'm just more and more feeling like I own it. I like, so the more humble I became, the more capable and the more deserving I became. That was really weird.
What is the business called? The one that you currently run?
So the nonprofit
Yes.
is called Ostéo Campus et Solidarité, which means osteopathy on campus for solidarity, basically. So the idea is that the students pay €5 a year, which is pretty accessible, I guess. And then the school and our other partners, they pay for the consultations, which means that the students can get as many consultations as they need. And to be fair, they really need it, which is kind of scary, but at the same time, like, okay, we've got a job to do. And yeah, I was at a forum at the beginning of the week, and I was talking about this to a lot of directors from different schools in the town, and everyone was on board. Like, everyone wants that. And if I had done that 5 years ago, nobody would have gone on that train. So it's a pretty crazy thing as well, like to see that an idea that was planted in your brain that maybe is yours, but maybe just came from like the incredible zeitgeist and God, is blooming. That's humbling. That's crazy.
I have a couple of questions, and there's two specific things I'm very interested in. So I'm very interested in the more practical starting a business part that you mentioned, and you had two shots so far that you did, two companies that you started.
Right.
The first one being that network that you built that stopped after a year.
Yeah.
So let's discuss that one first, and then after that, I would like to delve into the woods with you regarding osteopathy itself. So what is it? How do you apply it? What are you noticing? Some examples of some work that you're doing and the impact that you see that has. So let's take those apart one by one. So the first one, you had the company that, if I got this right, you brought medical professionals together in a network to provide services to everybody who was connected to the network. That's what I got from that. And you said that before you started that network, you did public funding and you raised quite a bit of money to start that. But then as the money started running out, you came into trouble. And after a year, you were forced to execute the company pretty much. That was the primary reason. What other reasons? So two questions. What other reasons were there that led to closing the company? And more practically, at the beginning of starting that company, did you have a business plan in place? Did you have any sort of documentation or planning or partners in place to make sure that everything that you were about to start, that it was actually sound, and you had the funds to do that? So what I'm trying to get at is, was your vision of the company sound, or was there anything that happened during that year that prevented that vision from being fulfilled, which then led to the finances draining? So how did that year look pretty much? What happened from the start to finish?
Yeah. These are two great questions. First of all, you are very great at listening because you understood exactly the business plan, even though I talked about it like for half a second. So it was a network to connect patients and medical professionals. The idea was that we would gather around a conference and a round table every month on different subjects, and we would also have yoga and meditation every week.
Okay.
And so on that side, it was pretty sound because, well, these were interesting things that people were interested in. Now, there is thousands competitors to that business model. And we just came out of osteopathy school. So we weren't really as tech savvy as we could. We weren't as commercials as we could. We didn't have all of these skills, marketing, online marketing, that kind of thing. So we lacked some abilities, I would say. The other side of it is that, well, as I told you, I was really ambitious, and I think I was into a chaos at that point where potential was leaking all over the place. Like I just felt potential everywhere, and so I was trying to do my best, but I was working in 40 different directions at the same time, trying to build the model for students and the model for patients and professionals at the same time, and having two other work at the same time, and the same for my two associates. So we were just on too many fronts at the same time. And even though you were right, we did raise a little bit of money, but it wasn't that much, and I was indebted, so I didn't have too much cash to allow into the funding as well. So there were many difficulties. But to answer your second question, I think it was still planned because I during the last part of my studies, I studied entrepreneurship. I went ahead and did two how would you call this, formations on that. And so I kind of got the idea, but then doing it is a totally different business. Like, you can understand something and then do it, and you don't do it well. And I think I wasn't doing it well because I wasn't as organized as I am today, and I wasn't as disciplined, and I was working on too many fronts at the same time.
Did the people or person that was funding you, did they ask you for a detailed business plan, and did they challenge on what it contained? Because what you're saying right now, pretty much in my mind, sounds like assumptions. So part of starting a business means that you have to do things like competitor analysis. You know, you want to know what general risks are and how you will act upon those risks, and you also want to know if there are any assumptions in your thinking that you need to do something with. So usually, when you're looking for a business partner to help you out, either financially or with specific skills, they will challenge you on your assumptions. So, hey, Jean, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Did you have a person like that to spar with? Did they provide that kind of feedback?
Not necessarily, because it was more love money and crowdfunding,
right?
Rather than raising money from financial, like, people that were waiting a result.
Like banks.
Yeah. But we still had some sort of feedback, but I mean, it wasn't as powerful as that. And generally speaking, I think it was a good idea, but not well implemented.
Yeah, and it also sounds like you had too much ambition, so you wanted to do too many things too quickly. Yeah. So in classic, generally speaking, you have a couple of things that you can play with. You have your scope, your budget, and your time, right? And these things play with each other. So you might have unlimited time and you might have unlimited budget. Then you can make your scope as large as possible, pretty much. But generally
Right.
speaking, that's not how it works. It sounds to me like the budget was too low. The time was, well, it doesn't sound like you really had a time factor because that year, of course, wasn't really in the cards yet, I guess. But anyway, time regardless is a factor in some shape or form. But I think your scope was too large, which made the specific steps that you could take too vague or too, what would the right word be? To not leading towards a specific goal. So not specific, I suppose. Would that be a fair summary?
Yeah, it's a good analysis.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a very gratifying one, but it's a good analysis.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's like you said, those are so these are the types of failures, no matter how painful they are, that can teach a lot of lessons if properly analyzed.
Right. What it taught me was that, well, to take yourself seriously, you have to actually implement what you're saying to others into your own life.
Mm-hmm.
To
Follow
make a
the
business.
advice that you give others.
Yeah, exactly. And so that was a very important thing. And the other one was that I could follow through with a project.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I failed it, I actually did it. And that was a very interesting thing to do, to discover as well. So I'm happy about what it taught me. I'm not really happy about the fact that it burnt resources, but
Yeah.
I think I'm more mature about it now.
Were there any other consequences? So the people that provided the funding, did you have any obligation towards them that needed to be broken or something like that?
Yeah, I don't think I want to go this way. This is not the right direction.
Do you want to skip to the
Yeah,
next part?
let's skip. That's not the most comfortable subject, I guess.
All right, fair enough. Okay, so let's make the jump to the second business. So you had a lot of lessons under your belt, a lot of things that you learned, and with that you started the new business, the osteopathic business. Tell me, so just for my understanding, because I'm not really clear on what osteopathy is to begin with, and especially how it's different from physiotherapy. To me, it kind of sounds the same, but I'm quite sure that you can give me a well-defined differentiation between the two. So let's start there. What is the difference between osteopathy and physiotherapy? Why did you want to start an osteopathy business, and how did you start it?
So the difference between osteopathy and physiotherapy will most of the time depend on who you talk to.
Mm-hmm.
If you talk to me, what I would say is that in France, physiotherapy is extremely appreciated, or at least extremely appreciated by doctors, and they will send a lot of their patients into physiotherapy.
Right.
That's a great thing. That's a very, very good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the issue is that since they receive so many patients, they're not very available, and they will sometimes take several patients at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's good for them, good for the patients. But they lose in relationship. They lose in connection with the actual patient, and they lose in the way that they actually care for people. And I have been reported that many times, and I know even physiotherapists in France which are annoyed with the situation. So one of the difference with osteopathy is that we are not part of the medical system at the moment. So doctors don't really send us patients, even though they kind of start to do that. But we have had a difficult history with doctors,
Mm-hmm.
because 20 years ago, our profession was practically illegal. And the reason for that is that there's no scientific perfect proof of how it works, why it works, and if it works. So not everyone is on that train, and I can perfectly understand that from a scientific point of view. Now, our point of view, and it's one that's pretty humble in my experience, is that we don't have the tools to say how it works, but we do have the tools to say it works based on experience. So what we try to rely on is what we work for during our whole practice, during our studies, what we are taught, and then what we do during our practice with our patients and how they respond. So it's very adaptive to every patient we encounter.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the people will come for physical issues: back pain, shoulder pain, wrist pain, knee pain, that kind of stuff. That's because we're called osteopathy, and os in French means bone, so osteo means bone. And that's a very interesting thing, because we will do things with one subject who has lower back pain and with another that has the same symptom that are completely different. Because what we do is we do not try to actually work on the symptom, but on the causes. And
Right.
that's where it gets pretty weird with the doctors, because what they will do is either do a physical exam where they do the same tests to everyone, or do exams with like MRI scanner, a scanner, a radiography, that kind of thing. And we are able with our bare hands to discover different situations in the body of the patients that are subliminal. They are under what most people would basically feel. And we do that very simply. We do that by touching the shoulder. Where is it dense? Where is it deformed? Where is it not the same way that the other shoulder? Where does it feel like when I push, the person feels pain? That kind of stuff. And so what we'll do then is to talk with the person and try to understand their experience of their lives. What do you do? Do you play sports? Do you have a sedentary lifestyle? Do you eat? How do you eat?
You're trying to find the root cause of it, pretty much.
Exactly. And what we will find, and that's the most interesting part of our work, because we're literally investigating the person's life to find why they just started to have pain at some point, is that the same person, or maybe the same symptom in two people's lives, will be lived very differently. Of course, someone that works at a desk who has a wrist injury will lose their job, essentially. Like they can't work anymore. Like they can't use their hand. It's done.
Yeah.
It's really hard for them to keep on working. Someone who is maybe a teacher, maybe speaking, maybe using their voice, will maybe have it a little bit easier. But then it gets harder, because that's just based on your occupation. Now, let's say you have a back injury or just back pain. It's not caused by any kind of, you haven't fallen to the ground, or you haven't been hit or anything. Like, you just develop a back pain. Okay. Well, let's say you're really stressed. Well, this is going to hurt a lot more. And that's what's really weird, is that if you can get the person to relax, if you can get the person to concentrate on their pain, if you can get the person to think about the situation they are in, and you are working on their body, trying to make it less dense, less tense, you are making them relax their body while they're speaking or thinking about something, it really helps. And this goes even to maybe thinking about a particular event in your life when the pain started. And so we truly have a sort of triangulating way of understanding the person we have in front of us, and answering their issue, their need, which is essentially to stop pain. But we don't do it with the same answer as we would give everyone, and that's where we differ from medical treatment, and rightfully so. I mean, if I have a condition that is well understood and that I can get a medication and it gets away very easily, well, I want the same medication as everyone that will give me the same results. That's the great way of working when you deal with drugs. When you deal with a more complex approach and you try to understand the person in their own experience, then you have to adapt. And that's a pretty hard thing to do.
Yeah. So tell me if I got this right. So I'm gonna differentiate physiotherapy and osteopathy for you. So tell me if I got this right. I've had a couple of conversations in the last couple of weeks that made me think more about the differentiation between treating the symptom and treating the root cause, and that those two are two very, very different things. And it sounds to me, and I never went to a physiotherapist in my life, so my experience pretty much on this subject is zero. But if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is a physiotherapist primarily, will take a look at your body and will massage or do the thing that is needed in order to alleviate that pain or fix it for you, and pretty much stop there. And what you will do is you will also do that, but you will go a step further. With you, there's also not necessarily a psychological part, but there's a mental part. You will try to dig to see what led to that problem, so you can advise the person, like, okay, if you are, for example, a builder and you have lower back pain because you're carrying a lot of heavy stuff, try not to bend your back too much, but keep your back straight, so you can make sure that this doesn't happen in the future again. But for now, I will give you the proper treatment so we can solve it. Stuff like that. Is that the right analysis? So you will provide the treatment, and together you will also provide advice and make people aware of what led to that problem to begin with. Is that the differentiation?
Yeah, generally it's what we would say. Now,
Right.
of course, generalities don't always apply. So there are some physiotherapists who will also do that, and some doctors who will also do that, and a field of medical practice which is all about prevention rather than treatment. And that's very, very interesting. So
Right.
this is a good analysis, though.
And why was it? Very stupid question. Why was this illegal? Because to me, it sounds like you're doing the exact same thing as physiotherapy, but you are talking to people about how they can prevent this from happening in the future and what led to it to begin with. Why would that be illegal?
Well, the history of osteopathy is not very long. We started in America, actually, and then it went into Britain and then France, and so it developed on its own before becoming more mainstream. And well, the founder of osteopathy was pretty he was pretty controversial, to say the least. Anyway, he didn't really like the answer of medical treatments to illnesses in his time, and he lost several children and his wife to medical treatments. So he had his reasons, and he also had his results to speak to his way of treating diseases that were pretty impressive. He wouldn't treat like basically lower back pain. He would treat like infections with his own bare hands and have great results on infections. So that's what's pretty, I mean, the history of osteopathy, even in America now, is amazing. Like, I went to San Francisco just after after graduating from my osteopathic school, and I thought, hey, that's where osteopathy was born. Let's go to an osteopath and see how they work. Well, I ended up working on the osteopath, and he didn't really tell me how he worked. He just wanted to have a good consultation for free for like 45 minutes. And he was really nice about it. He was an old school guy, and at the same time in San Francisco, a very progressive guy. So it was a very interesting thing to behold for me. And what he told me was absolutely crazy, is that actually in America, so osteopaths were practicing osteopathy for a long time, but it wasn't really accepted by the medical uh, administrations. And so at some point they thought, okay, these people are working in a very specific way. We can't control it. We don't see exactly what they're doing. We don't really like it. What we're going to do is we're going to send these people a letter telling them that they cannot do this job unless they are medical doctors. And any of them that's practicing at the moment will be able to become a medical doctor if they train for, like, I don't know, 20 weeks or something.
Right.
Which is crazy. You don't turn people into medical doctors like that. That's not how it happens usually. But what they got out of that was that now any and all of the osteopaths that are trained in America have to be trained in medical school. So they are all medical doctors. And what that created was that a whole new wave of osteopaths in America are basically doctors prescribing medicine, never touching anyone with their bare hands, but, quote unquote, thinking like osteopaths. So this has changed the profession a lot. And right now, in France, at least, and in other parts of the world, osteopathy is more about working with your hands, the way a chiropractor would do it.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, chiropractic is not exactly the same thing. And in my experience, and I might be wrong about that, but they are more about the treatment, the symptom treatment, and applying the same thing for the same symptom. But I'm not sure about that exactly. I believe that a good practicing chiropractor would be very efficient anyway.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel about that? That you have a huge wave in the United States of osteopaths who don't actually practice, but just provide prescriptions for medicines?
Well, it certainly isn't in the philosophy of the founder, which is, I mean, it's not that old, but it's still old. So not everything he was prescribing would be correct today by today's standards. So I could understand the need to update that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think personally that touch is something we miss in care at all levels. Like touching people, touching patients, having a connection with them through physical contact is very, very important. That's a very basic thing in human therapy, in human relationships. And I talk about that with my psychologist friends, and they're like, what? You touch people? You're allowed to do that? Because, of course, to them, it's like breaking an implied contract that they're not supposed to enter the bubble of the person. And we do that, and we have all the ethics to respect on that front. And it must be very, very thought out. And so I'm not sure this is the way osteopathy should be practiced. But then again, I'm not a medical doctor from the US, so I wouldn't exactly know. And I haven't seen them at their practice. I would be very more comfortable to talk about it if I had seen them practice. I can only talk on the experience of that man. And it was shocking because, well, that's the essence of the treatment.
Mm-hmm. Right. And in France, it's not needed. So those 20 week that 20-week example that you gave me, in France, that is not needed.
Well, we're not doctors.
Right.
So we don't have to be inside the medical profession, but it's not very stable at the moment. Like they could decide at any point, like, hey, that's not good. We're banning you again.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was that, so it was illegal in France, but there were so many patients coming to the trials of osteopaths that they were like, we can't fine you. Like so many people are saying that you're doing good jobs. We can't really prosecute you. Like we're just going to fine you €1 and then let you go, but we have to do something about legalizing it.
Right. So to be clear, in France right now, there's nothing stopping someone from becoming an osteopath. Pretty much, there's no education needed. You can pretty much, follow an online course, pretty much, or
No,
do
no,
some
no,
online
no, no,
research. Okay.
no. It's not like that. It's
Okay.
it has been legalized and it has been made very specific. It's 5 years of study, very specific
Right.
curriculum. It's only private schools in English. It's a weird term because I think it means public school in French. So what I mean is a school that you pay. You can't go to the university, which is basically free in France.
Mm-hmm.
You have to pay your school, and the schools are audited to see if they are meeting criterion, specifically in the clinic area, where you have to see, I don't know, it's maybe 200 hours of actual
Mm-hmm.
consultations before you graduate.
Yeah.
So
Okay. So it's a protected
yeah,
profession. Okay.
yeah, of
Yeah.
course. So what would actually today discourage people from becoming osteopaths is that we have too many osteopaths.
Okay. So there's not really a good business in it anymore.
Well, there has been a lot of hype, and I'm working on the fact that young people will discover the profession and enjoy
Mm-hmm.
it for the rest of their lives. So I'm hoping more people in France will come to us with their issues, and hopefully we can help. But at the moment, well, it's very concurrential.
Are there some misconceptions about osteopathy that you often encounter, and how do you address these with patients or other people that bring them forward?
There are so many,
Do you have a few
so
examples?
many. Yeah. The first one is what I talked about concerning what we treat and what we don't treat.
Mm-hmm.
People often come with issues, let's say, that are uh, articulatory or bone related, muscle related. And pretty much, if we have the time to investigate more the other issues, well, we discover that they don't have only that issue, but they're coming for that issue. So they are expecting a result on this issue. But
Right.
most of the time, we will, like, lower back pain is so related to the guts and the organs of the whole anterior body.
Mm-hmm.
So what we will do is probably work on the back, work on the pelvis, work on the organs of the belly, maybe work on the diaphragm for um, respiratory functions. And I don't know, at some point, like, ask, hey, have you had at some point a car accident? Yes, I have. Oh, okay. So I'm going to check your spine. I'm going to check your neck. I'm going to check your head, because there's probably a lot of tensions that have accumulated in that place and that are not permitting you to move in a way that's making your body relaxed.
Mm-hmm.
And so at some point, it's going to create tension and pain, and maybe in your lower back, maybe in your shoulder, maybe in your chest, maybe somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first preconceived idea. The second one would be that we only do what's seen on social media, which is cracking techniques, which are very, very releasing, very soothing, very cool, very interesting to look at, very
Looks nice on
interesting to
video.
learn, but it's sensational.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, in my own practice, it's maybe 10, 15% of what I do, but most of the time, that's not what I do.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, there's some more chiropractic type osteopaths that do only that, and some that are more, well, that approach it differently. So it's very adaptative. What I like to do, I would say that what I like to do is to really adapt to the person. Hey, you don't want to be cracked? That's okay. Hey, you want to be very cracked? That's okay.
Very correct.
Yeah,
Is that a
cracked
thing?
up.
People come in and they want to be correct?
Yeah, it's all the time, man. It's
Really?
what Yeah, it's what people think we do because they see that all the time on social media. They see a guy wearing gloves, like breaking the back of someone. They're like, "Hey, that's what I need." And I mean,
Yeah.
that's fun. That's fun, but it doesn't really it doesn't go far into what we do, because so much is based on relationship. So much is based on trust and having an interesting relationship with the person.
Do you use things like those long needles or hot stones or anything like that?
No. Personally, I only work with my hands. That's why I love the job. I can go anywhere, no material, just my own body, and I can heal people. That's just amazing.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. I think we are nearing the end of our time, Jean. You mentioned before that you had to go away around this time.
I can go just a little bit longer if you have other questions.
Yeah, not about osteopathy, to be honest. It's pretty clear. And I think we covered a lot of ground.
Right.
Is there anything? Maybe I should just ask you the question. Is there anything that you feel that we skipped that you want to shed some extra light on?
I like to share a story.
Bring it on.
In Exodus, when the Hebrews, I should say, are crossing the Red Sea, and they are just liberated from slavery. They celebrate on the other side of the sea. They have a big feast, and then they get into the desert. And well, I just had spent 35 hours a week, as I was saying, listening to Jordan Peterson. So no, not a week, a month. That's already way too much time. I broke a ear doing that. Like I have tinnitus now because of that. And so I was spending so much time, because it was just before my baptism this year, and I had this feeling that I was going to get baptized, cross the Red Sea, and get into the desert really quick. And that's what happened in June. So I was baptized in March. One of my associates went away the past December, and my other associate were looking at working together again. And at some point he said, well, I'm not sure anymore. And that was weird, because it was the day before the deal. I had already set up everything. And so it was a weird thing to do. And he is very, very reliable, very stable. And I was like, that's not him. That's weird. So I told him, look, take your time. I was just baptized, so I'm a little crazy, and I want to do things right. So I'm going to be really, really soft at that point. I'm going to just give you time.
Right.
But I still got angry, which is not very unreasonable. And I was going to church, and I felt angry, and I said, that's not happening. Like, I cannot go to church and be angry. I always put H there. Sorry. So I cannot be angry. So I pray into church, and I hear this very, very clear voice telling me, peace, be still, which translates in French into shut up. Pretty accurately, because it's something like silence, shut up, literally. And this comes from a story in the New Testament, where Jesus is peacefully sleeping in a little boat, and the apostles are rowing, and there's like a grandmother of a storm, if you see what I mean. And there is just, they are going to be killed. And so they're scared, and they wake up Jesus, and they say, Jesus, we are going to die. And Jesus is like, hey, I'm in the boat. We are not dying. I am the Son of God. Like, what did you expect? You thought a little storm would kill me? Are you serious? So he looks at the storm and says, basically, shut up. And the storm calms down. And I was like, hey, that's a crazy story. That means that if you have Jesus in your boat and there's a tempest around you, and you wake him up and you tell him, hey, I'm going to die, he says, hey, look at this tempest. Shut it up. And now you're good. So this was maybe the hardest time in my whole experience, because my business. My first business was failing. My second one was not starting really properly since my business associate wasn't participating anymore. Financially, I was, for the third time, extremely poor. My third job was not paying it anymore. My father is becoming ill. He's very close to like being gone at that point. My relationship, my intimate relationship is shaky. My faith is being challenged. And I just keep that phrase in my head all the time, like, shut up. Not exactly, but more peace, be still, something along those lines. And so I keep really quiet. I keep to myself. I enter a more ascetic kind of way of living. I tried the carnivore diet for 15 days, which tells you more about my fasting and my being obsessed by by Jordan Peterson at that point. And so I do this. I get carbs to be low. I keep my discipline up, even though everything's falling apart. I'm calm. I'm collected. My girlfriend is annoyed at my friends and associate, and I'm like, it's okay. And what happens is that I thought it was going to be for a week, and then it's a whole month. And after a whole month, I'm still pretty angry, but I'm still keeping collected. And I tell him, well, if you're ready, we can talk. So he tells me he's ready. And we talk. And what I learned is that my friend that I've known for 7 years is really feeling unwell. He is not good. And I could have gone completely past that if I had been angry. But I kept to myself my anger for the moment, and I just listened to my friend being unwell. And that was maybe the most Christian thing I had ever done up to that point. And why I tell this story is that a few days later, there was this very important mass for me, which was the end of the year mass, which is a big, crazy party in my church. And that's the first mass I attended in this church. And that's the first mass that made me understand that you can have fun in a church. And more on top of that, I was going to receive a letter that was a mission. And that was my mission for being baptized. As a disciple of Jesus, I was getting a mission. And most of the time you would choose your mission. But me, I said, look, I'm not humble enough. Give me what you think is good for me, okay? I don't want to pick for myself, because either I will get passionate and do it for 2 weeks, or I will just like pick something I think is good and then it's not good. So I said, I'm going to be humble this time, and I'm going to say to my priest, just choose for me. Pray and see what happens. And so I get to this mass, and there's the first text is on Job. Job. How do you say this in English? Anyway.
Yeah, Job.
Right. And so it's pretty intense. I'm like, hey, are we supposed to be partying or something? And the second one is on like faith and being faithful even in like the desert or a tempest or something. And the third text comes in, and it's like Jesus was in a little boat and the disciples were rowing, and there's a hell of a tempest going their way, and they're going to die. And they wake Jesus up, and he says to the tempest, peace, be still. And I started crying. I was like, how is this even possible, man? And the reason why I'm telling this story is because the letter of mission that I received was to testify. And that's how I got my testimony. After that, well, we got better with my partner. I bought up the business alone, and I'm now controlling it, and I'm getting better at it. And also, I'm signing this great contract with this second business school in France, and the big bank that gave us all of this money for free, they're giving us more money, and all of our consultations are full. And I got, for 3 months, I was going over my life, and you asked me to do this interview, and I posted my testimony on Peterson Academy, and it got reposted by Jordan Peterson, the man. And life's going well, man.
Beautiful.
So that's crazy.
There's a lot of beauty in your analysis of that story. And the biggest lesson, I think, in my opinion, that can be taken away from that is listen. Don't always talk. Listen. Because there's a whole lot of things happening around you that you will only hear and experience if you listen.
That's exactly right. And that's why, being arrogant as I was, I couldn't have figured that out. So thank God for that.
It's a beautiful skill to have for a lot of different reasons, both practical and, well, I guess moral is the other way. But it's a beautiful thing regardless. So great story. Thanks for telling that one, John.
It was a pleasure, Jeffrey. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you too. It was really fun talking to you. Let's, if the time is right, let's do a follow up. I'm really curious to see and to learn how the business of yours is going, especially maybe a year down the line or something like that.
That's great.
But yeah, for sure. Thank you very much for coming on and sharing your story. It was a pleasure listening to you. And it sounds like you're really doing well. So congratulations on that.
Thank you for having me. And you can pray for me if you want.
I'll certainly keep you in mind, 100%. Perfect, John. Take care of yourself.
Goodbye.
Bye. And with that, Jean has left the conversation. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing or following the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube. And before I leave you, let me share with you a quote by C.S. Lewis. True humility is not thinking less of yourself. It is thinking of yourself less. Thank you for listening, and take care.